Well, again, we are reconfirming. We've been really going through a lot of the stuff in the Bible, and there's one thing that I felt like we were kind of missing out. It's a character, if you would call it a character, that's a presence that's been in the Bible that has been throughout some of the books that we've been talking about, but we haven't really mentioned it too much, and that's the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark kind of looks like this thing right here. It's in Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st Kings, 1st Chronicles, 2nd Chronicles, Jeremiah, Hebrews, and it's even mentioned in Revelations. This is a weird one of those where we kind of turn a little scientific, or science fiction almost, really. This is the thing where the presence of God was a part of us. It's actually, to tell you the truth, it actually looks like this right here. This is what was known as the Ark of the Covenant. And on it was where the cherubim were. And the cherubim's focus was supposed to be on the most holy place. And that was right here. This is where blood was spilled as a sacrifice. Inside of it were the Ten Commandments. Also Aaron's staff from Moses, and also a dish filled with manna from when the Exodus, when they were leaving Egypt, and God dropped manna from the sky. There was manna in there. It was a very sacred thing. This is where they say God was housed. This is where he stayed. And the high priest, would carry this as they were traveling with Moses ahead of everybody. It was kind of the thing that led their path. If anybody wants to look at this after service, please feel free to come and take a look at it. The real one was much bigger. They would have this thing in the tabernacle. They would set up this. It was kind of a church. It was kind of a traveling church, but it was also, once the temple got established, it was part of that as well. So it was a traveling thing that they would set up when they were running around with Moses, and then once they got to Jerusalem and kind of got set, it was set up permanently there. But they would have this place, this first room, and in the room would be kind of a lamp. It would be like this table, and the first room was basically called the Holy Room. Okay. This one, a lot of people could enter, and they could enter often. The second room, which was taken by a curtain, this was called the Holy of Holies, and this is where the Ark of the Covenant sat. This is where only once a year the highest priest would go in and make a sacrifice. Once a year. And there were things that were about this that were so powerful that the high priest, actually had to have a rope tied around him and held on to from the people on the outside, because, see, this thing had some powers that they didn't quite understand. And there was a risk that even the high priest would not survive this act of sacrifice. And if he were to die, he had the rope to where the other people on the other side could actually drag him out. This was the thing that was in the Indiana Jones movie, Raiders of the Lost Ark. Melted the faces of the people. This thing had strange powers. They truly, truly believed that this is where God lived. This was where you would go and talk to God himself. And once a year, he would make a sacrifice, and you would take the blood into the Holy of Holies, and you would drip it between the two cherubim there, the most holy place. And you would sacrifice and atone for the forgiveness of all the sins that people had throughout that year. But this thing also did other things too. Remember in Joshua, when they crossed the Jordan and it dried up for them? It's because they had the ark. And the ark, as long as they stood the ark there, and the waters dried up, and they were able to walk across. This thing has won wars for them. It's killed people. It's not, I mean, it is actually, the ark actually killed people that were not allowed to touch it. Even Hebrews, Israelites, that were not high priests, if they got too near it, they would die. This thing had some amazing qualities to it. And anybody that got their hands on it felt like this was almost like having the superpower of the world. It was more than science fiction. This thing was a powerful, powerful deal. God himself said, this is how I'm going to travel with you people. And so once a year they would make a sacrifice, feeling that God was right there. In our story, if we're talking about the chronological order where we're at, remember Samuel has just been, he's a judge now, and he's starting to bring that line of prophecy. In the meantime, we're fighting the Philistines. The Israelites are. And the fight is right. It's stupid for me to point, isn't it? Because I'm like 5 feet tall. Right here. And Shiloh is where the ark is being basically kept right now. And so they're going to take it. They decide, because they're getting beaten by the Philistines right here. The Philistines were known for two things. They were known for high-tech war. They were good at it. And believe it or not, they were also known for beer. They brewed their own. And if they weren't fighting, they were drunk. This is the Philistines. They took a lot of pride in their God. And so the Israelites go into a battle, and about 7,000 of their guys get killed. So they decide, well, let's take the ark. We'll take the ark, and then we'll annihilate these guys. And it'll work for us. So they take it upon themselves to take the ark. You see, before that, God always instructed them, what to do with the ark, where to go with the ark. But this time they said, we're going to take the ark, and we'll annihilate the beer-drinking Philistines. What happened was right here, the ark was taken from them in Ebenezer. Philistines annihilated them and stole the ark. This devastated people. Devastated so much that the family that basically raised Samuel, when they heard the news, the father died. He was a heavy-set guy, and he fell over and broke his neck. His sons were killed in the battle because they were priests and they were with the ark. And they were killed and the ark was taken. So what do you do with this big, powerful thing here? Well, the Philistines, of course, think now that they have this huge little box here, that they can take it, and wherever they go, they can annihilate anybody that they want to. This is the nuclear bomb of ancient times. They think as long as whoever owns this owns the power of the world. Problem is right about here in Aphek, something starts to happen to the Philistines. Everybody that's around this thing starts getting tumors. See, there's a lot of historians and a lot of archaeologists that say there has to be something that was radioactive in this thing. In order to do the powers that it did, there had to have been something nuclear about this thing. Radioactive, or the way that it would kill people. The way that only certain people were able to touch it. The way it had to be respected, and if it wasn't, it meant death. The way that this helped win battles and wars. But in the wrong hands, well, the Philistines started to know that. And it took them a while, because they're drunks. And so they think, well, if it's given us tumors here, well, then let's move it to Asia down there. And what happened there is everybody that they moved it there got tumors. And so they figured, well, let's just move it to another place here. Tumors. So they're just moving this thing, and it's, tumors, oh my God. Well, the problem is we're in the wrong place, so let's move it here. Tumors, everybody's getting tumors, and suddenly, party's over for him because everybody is just getting very, very sick that touches this thing or even goes near it. Finally, they get to a point where they basically call up the Israelites and they say, you want your ark back? Because it ain't doing what we thought it would. And how do we give it back to you? Because it's killing our people. And so the Israelites basically said, well, you're going to have to take some stuff and make a sacrifice. You're going to have to take some of your gold and give it to us. Basically, they had to pay the Israelites to take it back, which they did. Now the question is how does something like this work? And why didn't it work in the beginning when the Israelites took it to the Philistines? It's just a box. It's a box that was made of wood, and it was encased in gold. And it was actually meant to where you could actually tear it apart. You could break it down if you needed to. Somewhere in our history, too, we think that it might have been around the time, we're going to jump way ahead here, but and we'll get to it eventually, but we jump way ahead and the Babylonians take over Israel. Because Israel falls in and out of grace with God throughout the history because they keep turning their backs in and out of God. And so the ark somehow, during that time, disappears. And to this day, we don't really know what happened to it. There's a lot of people that in recent archaeological digs around Jerusalem, they found underground caves. And one person, an archaeologist, explorer type guy, built himself a facsimile of the ark to see if it was possible to smuggle the ark out of these caves. And he proved that it was. See, the theory is that during either the fall over the Babylonians, or it also is there was one king that started to worship all sorts of other gods. And the high priests, which had to be dressed like this when they touched the ark. It's believed that they smuggled it out of Israel through Egypt. And it's believed that it's here, in Axum, Ethiopia. Many people believe that it's there because of a couple reasons. One, there's an incredible amount of Jewish Ethiopians, and nobody can explain why. These Ethiopians here are Christians now. They were raised Jewish, and then they became Christians. And there is one person, call him the high priest, if you will, that is never allowed to leave this area. He guards what they say is the ark inside there for the rest of his life. And when he dies, they replace him with another person that will move in there and never leave. We don't really know. But we do know around the archaeological digs around Ethiopia, see, Ethiopia claims that they have some artifacts from Solomon's time. And one of them is this little metal plate here. Not the actual thing with the squares on it, but the thing that he's using to wear that. They also found a big dish called a gomer. This is where they, not gomer pile, this is a gomer where they would make the sacrifices and put the blood. They found all these things in Ethiopia. And so a lot of people really think that it is here. Problem is the Ethiopians will never let anyone except the high priest step foot in there. They could own, right now, the most powerful thing in the world. But is it the most powerful thing in the world? Again, it's just a box. They even worship in the churches that they have in this area. They have facsimiles. They have models of the Ark of the Covenant, including the Ten Commandments. And they treated it as if it's the real one, where you're not allowed to even go and see those. But for some reason, this entire Ethiopian community here has, for hundreds of years, claimed that they have had that. And for hundreds of years, they have worshipped Christ and been Jewish when no one has ever, before any missions or anybody came out there. See, what they believe is that the high priest smuggled it and settled here. And it's been guarded there ever since. Now, that could be just as wild as the Indiana Jones thing. It could be true. Nobody really knows. But does it matter? Because, see, God said that later on that he doesn't just live in boxes. And that the sacrifice was no longer necessary. Because he said there was only one sacrifice made, and it was made for eternity. So this was no longer needed. You see, Paul talks in the book of Hebrews where it's mentioned that this was never really necessary. This was God teaching us what sacrifice was. This is why every year somebody would drop blood on that. But the blood never took care of the sins. We know that now. They hated to do these sacrifices, by the way. This wasn't something that people enjoyed doing. It was a pain. It was a big, messy thing. It smelled bad. It was a pain. But once a year, they would do this. Paul said, this isn't necessary anymore because God doesn't live in boxes. God lives in our hearts. The new temple where God lives is here in our hearts. And one sacrifice has been made, and that was when Christ died for us on the cross. His blood was shed for us, and that is where we have now had the sacrifice. See, this was just practice. This was just symbolic of what was to come. And Paul said, you know what? Now our rituals really aren't necessary. In other words, who cares where the ark is? Because it's a worthless box now. God doesn't live there anymore. During the Old Testament, it was believed that he did, and maybe his presence was there. And maybe it did win wars because God said that. But you know what? The Philistines lost it because God didn't tell them to take it. See, one of the problems that we have is if we get something like this where we say, I have the power of God, boy, can we abuse that. Because now God is a thing, and we can design it how we want, we can make it what we want, and we can make it win our arguments and our battles. We can say what's wrong is what's wrong. We can judge who's saved, who's not, because we have the power of God in our hands. Even Hitler searched for the ark because he believed that if whoever got it would have that power. In our history, this is a very real deal here. But it's just a box. And God doesn't like it when we say, I'm going to use God for my own thing, and I'm going to do it and win this war. That's when God said, okay, let the Philistines take it. Because I didn't tell you to do that. Oftentimes we try to define God this way. We try to say, well, this is what our God is, and this is how he works for us, and this is how, his powers are for me, and this is what I believe, so God's going to believe this, and I'll just take my God with me wherever I go, and I'm going to be right. But God says, no, that's not true, because God doesn't live in boxes. And when you try to tell God what to do, oftentimes he's going to say, I don't work that way. You see, we treat God kind of like it's a box, like it's a club. We want to continue to customize it. We want to take out the stuff in the Bible that we don't like. We want to take out the stuff where Jesus himself says stuff that we don't like. And we want to make it into our own image. Sometimes God tells us that's not the way I am. God is who he is. And that means you have to take some of the stuff that you like. You got to take some of the stuff that you don't like. You can't pick and choose. You got to take it all. And he's more powerful than a box. Imagine if we really truly saw the Ark of the Covenant in every person, because that's where Jesus says it is now. There's 100 Arks of the Covenant in this very room right now, because Christ is living in it right now. If we took that and said, I have an Ark of the Covenant, but so do you, it might change the way that we deal with people. It might change the way we respect them. It might change the way that we treat them. And it might also give us a feeling like, well, maybe we're worth it. If God chose to come out of this box and into my heart, and he's staying with me, well, maybe that means that I'm okay. Maybe the one sacrifice that God made, maybe that includes me. Because a lot of us don't feel like we're worthy of that. But if God truly said, I live in you, I live in you, that's an amazing place. Paul said that none of this is necessary anymore. You know, he said that our rituals, our things that we do are not necessary because it's just routine, and it doesn't mean that anything that we do is going to save us because Christ already did that. And you know, Paul even said that basically it's not necessary. When we do communion, it doesn't serve. We're not bringing Christ here to save us from our sins. We don't need to do that once a month. We don't need to do that at all. Christ did it one time, and that's all we need. Christ made that sacrifice for everybody, for eternity. He said it is finished, which means we don't have to repeat it, which means once a year we don't have to go and make a blood sacrifice. The reason that we do this is to remember that. To remember that Christ died for us and that sacrifice is ongoing, that it doesn't fall away from us. And that we don't even need things like this. We don't have to have an altar. We do it because we remember. But again, it's just a box. Christ is here. So when we go there, when we go outside of the building, when we leave outside of the building, we need to remember that. We take the church with us. We take the home of Jesus Christ with us. And we take his message with us. We just like to bring people here so we can celebrate it together. We can celebrate the day that Christ said, "This is my body, and I break it for you, for your sins. And this is my blood, drink of it, and be forgiven." This is a one-time deal. Now we celebrate it. It's like a birthday. Every time we celebrate a birthday, it doesn't mean that you were born again. We celebrate the memory of when you were and the happiness that you came into this world. When we do this, we are celebrating the fact that Jesus, one time, said, "It's finished. Every one of you are forgiven." So I invite you to come and celebrate with us. Again, this is not a Methodist table. This is a Jesus table. Everybody's welcome. Our friends from out of town, if you're not a member of the Methodist Church, it's for everybody. So I invite our servers to come up as we celebrate what doesn't need to be done anymore. As we go today, I want to remind you a couple things. One, we have the great dinner coming up right afterwards, so I invite everybody just to come down and have some good meal and stuff like that. Fill you up so that when you eat the chips and dip for the football game, at least you can say, I had something healthy, which is good. So also, we have these comment cards and also the volunteers. Our church is built on volunteers, and so we really need people to fill those out too. But when you go to, remember that when you keep God in something like this, a thing, it's easy to just look at and to define and to not be a part of. But when you know God is here, it's easy to own, and it's easy to rely on, and it's easy to lean on when times are tough. So remember, He's right there for you.